The road seemed endless, but when I finally spotted the small house at the end of the path, I felt an immediate sense of relief. Parking in the driveway and seeing that simple and cozy house before me was exactly what I needed. After months of work stress, I was finally getting a few days to myself. No responsibilities, just rest. The house was just as described in the listing, modest, but cozy. The front garden looked a bit neglected, with the flowers wilting with the season. I took the key from the designated spot in the mailbox, as the owner had instructed, and stepped inside. The smell of wood greeted me, and the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet gave me a familiar feeling. I left my bags in the bedroom and took a quick tour around the house to make sure everything was in order. Soon after, I threw myself on the sofa in the living room, looking around. It was the perfect place to unwind. The silence was almost deafening, but in a good way. No traffic noise, no people, no distractions. Just me and the soft sound of the breeze hitting the windows. The fireplace in the corner looked inviting, and I planned to use it later. Everything was under control. I was alone, and for the next few days, it would stay that way. The thought gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in a long time. Little did I know that peace would soon be interrupted in a way I never imagined. The second day started quietly. I enjoyed my morning coffee on the porch, listening to the wind softly rustling the leaves. The house was quieter than I was used to, but I didn't mind. This was what I wanted. Time alone, with no interruptions, no city noise. It was almost lunchtime when I heard a knock at the door. I hadn't been expecting anyone, and a sudden chill ran down my spine. I stood up, trying to stay calm, and slowly opened the door. A couple stood there. The man was tall, with a serious expression, while the woman beside him looked slightly uncomfortable. They were both holding a piece of paper in their hands, which the man quickly extended toward me. "Hi, sorry to bother you," he began, "but I think there's been a mix-up. We booked this house through Airbnb, and our stay starts today." I was confused. "Sorry, but I also rented this house. I arrived yesterday." The couple exchanged surprised glances. The woman stepped forward, trying to be more friendly. "Are you sure? We received the confirmation, and everything seemed fine. Here, take a look." I took the paper they handed me, and sure enough, it looked like a booking confirmation. But something felt off. The dates were correct, but there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. This is really strange. I also have a confirmation. Maybe there's been some sort of mistake with the system, I suggested, already feeling an unease growing in my stomach. The man sighed, glancing at the woman before turning back to me. "Maybe, but what do we do now? Could you try calling the owner? Maybe he can sort this out." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Sure, I'll try to call him now." As I turned to get my phone, a sense of discomfort started to creep over me. Something didn't feel right. I quickly went back inside the house and grabbed my phone, trying not to let the growing nervousness show. I dialed the number the owner had provided at the time of booking and waited. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then went to voicemail. I tried the other number he had given me. Same result. I glanced out the window. The couple was still standing outside, waiting with thinly veiled impatience. Something was definitely wrong. I started to feel a knot tightening in my stomach. What if I had fallen victim to some kind of scam? I tried accessing the hosting app to check my booking details, but strangely, the page wouldn't load. Each attempt brought me back to a connection error. Frustrated, I looked again at the paper they had shown me. I was certain something was off, but at that moment, I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. With the phone still in hand, I opened the door again. I couldn't reach the owner. "Maybe the system is down. Are you sure this is the right address?" They exchanged another uncomfortable look. "Yes, of course, this is the address. We received all the details properly," the man replied. "Maybe we could figure this out together? Could we come in and try calling from here?" the woman suggested, taking a step forward. My heart raced. Something about that suggestion felt wrong. Why were they so eager to come inside? I closed the door slightly. I think it's better if I keep trying to reach him first. I'll let you know." My response didn't seem to satisfy them. The man, who had been polite until now, took a more assertive step toward the door. "Look, this is clearly a system error, but it doesn't make sense for us to stay out here waiting. We've got our luggage in the car. Can we at least come in and talk about this?" My mind was racing. Every instinct in me screamed that something was very wrong. That peaceful feeling I had when I first arrived was now a heavy weight in my chest. I needed to think fast, but I didn't want to make a scene. They were outside, but the way they insisted made me feel trapped. "Okay, but the problem is, I rented this place, and until we resolve this, I can't just let you in," I said, trying to sound firm. The woman, who had remained calm until now, crossed her arms and spoke in a tone that was sweet but forced. "We understand, but we can't just stay out here. You wouldn't leave us standing in the street, would you? It could just be a simple mistake. It happens all the time." My mind was spinning. How could they be so calm about this confusion? I started to wonder if they actually had a legitimate booking, or if something more sinister was going on. "I really need more time to try and get in touch with someone," I insisted, keeping the door only slightly open. The man's face grew more tense. "Look, this isn't going to end well if you keep locking us out. We have a booking, and we want to get this sorted as soon as possible. It's not like we're asking for a favor." My heart pounded even harder. My hands were sweating as I held onto the doorknob, trying to stay composed. They were being too persistent, and every minute that passed made me feel more cornered. Lie. The idea came to me suddenly. Maybe, if I pretended I wasn't alone, they would back off. I'll call my husband. He's upstairs, and he'll come down to sort this out," I said, hoping the lie would be enough to make them think twice. For a brief second, silence hung between us. I couldn't see their faces clearly through the slightly open door, but the pause in their response put me on high alert. They hadn't expected that. This was my chance to buy some time. "Okay," the man finally replied, his voice a bit less confident than before. "We'll wait here then." I shut the door, taking a deep breath, and ran to grab the phone. I needed help, and fast. Back inside with the door locked, I tried to keep calm while dialing the owner's number again. But before I could hear the dial tone, a horrible thought struck me. What if these numbers had been tampered with from the start? What if all of this was part of a larger scheme? I rushed to my laptop and tried once more to access the hosting site. The page simply wouldn't load. The sense of dread spread through me like a heavy weight on my shoulders. Everything seemed to be working against me. I glanced out the window again, and the couple was still there, now speaking quietly to each other. My mind raced. Was I caught in a scam? Could this couple be part of something much larger? As my thoughts swirled, I heard a faint but distinct sound coming from the side of the house. Footsteps? I took a deep breath and approached the living room window, trying to be as discreet as possible. When I looked out, my stomach turned. Besides the couple, there was someone else, a third man, who seemed to be inspecting the windows, maybe looking for a way in. Panic surged through me. I was surrounded. The possibility that this was all just a misunderstanding was shrinking by the second. The couple outside wasn't just trying to get in to solve a mix-up. They were trapping me, and they probably planned to break in. The sound of harder knocks at the door snapped me out of my trance. "Hey, let's talk." "It doesn't have to be like this," the man shouted. But I already knew. No talking would fix this. I had to protect myself, and fast. I rushed toward the master bedroom and locked the door behind me. My heavy breathing and pounding heart echoed in the silence. It was clear now. They weren't going to leave. And the sense of security that this house had given me at the start of the trip had turned into a living nightmare. Clutching the phone tightly, I dialed the emergency number. I was shaking so much that I nearly dropped the phone. When the operator answered, I let out a barely audible "Help. There are people trying to break into the house. Please, send someone fast." As I spoke, I heard the awful sound of wood splintering. They were forcing the front door. My heart raced even more, and in a panic, I put the phone on speaker so I wouldn't lose time while preparing to block any attempt to get inside. I ran to the wardrobe, pushing a heavy dresser against the bedroom door. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would buy me enough time until the police arrived. How long? I asked the operator, trying to control my voice, though fear was overwhelming me. We're dispatching a car now. Stay calm and stay safe. But it was hard to stay calm when the pounding echoed through the house, each one louder and more intense than the last. The sound of doors being forced made my body tremble. The shouts from outside grew more aggressive. We know you're in there. We just want to sort this out. But the desperation in the man's voice suggested otherwise. The sound of shattering glass paralyzed me for a second. They weren't just at the front door. They were trying the windows too. The third man, the one I had seen lurking around the house, must have made his move. Trapped in the bedroom, with furniture blocking the door and the intruders getting closer with each passing second, I reached my darkest moment. For a brief moment, I thought there was no escape. The sound of footsteps inside the house, closer with each second, made time slow to a crawl. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the most blessed sound. Sirens in the distance, quickly approaching. They heard it too. The shouting and banging outside faded, followed by the sound of footsteps quickly retreating out the front door. I was just minutes away from a much worse fate. The sound of hurried footsteps fading away brought me some relief. However, the fear still gripped my chest. What could have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time? I was frozen for a few seconds, trying to absorb everything, but the approaching sirens snapped me back to reality. I ran to the now broken window and saw the red and blue lights illuminating the driveway. I took a deep breath, feeling a small sense of safety returning, but I didn't dare leave the bedroom yet. My legs were trembling as I heard car doors closing and authoritative voices filling the air. Police, are you okay, ma'am? Can we come in? Finally, I unlocked the bedroom door and, with a mixture of relief and fear, went downstairs, still clutching my phone. The cold night wind blew through the broken window, bringing with it a sense of desolation, as if the nightmare still lurked in the shadows. 2 police officers were standing at the entrance, and one of them approached me with a look of concern. Are you all right? He asked, scanning the room. The intruders fled before we got here, but we're pursuing them. We've had reports of similar incidents in this area. I didn't know what to say. Words failed to come out. I just nodded, confirming that physically I was fine, but emotionally, I was still trapped in that moment of panic. We're going to need you to come to the station to give a statement, the other officer added. It seems like they were running a scam targeting rental homes like this one. The words echoed in my mind. A scam. Everything made sense now. They weren't just trying to rob the house. They had been targeting me from the start. Hours later, as I sat in the cold metal chair at the police station, everything that had happened began to take clearer shape. The officers' questions were precise and direct. They explained that organized groups had been using fake bookings on rental platforms to break into vacant homes, stealing valuables before disappearing. I was just another target in their bigger plan. As they explained the scheme, the feeling of vulnerability kept washing over me. What if I had opened the door? What if I hadn't been able to call the police in time? The questions echoed in my mind. The older officer gave me a reassuring smile. You did everything right. You bought enough time for us to get there. Many people aren't so lucky, but that luck wasn't enough to comfort me. When I finally left the station, with the promise that they would do everything to catch those responsible, I knew that the emotional scars would take a while to heal. In the days that followed, I reflected on everything that had happened. The trip I had planned as a peaceful, solitary retreat had turned into a terrifying experience. My trust in rental platforms, which had always seemed safe to me, was shaken. I would never stay in an Airbnb alone again. I rented the country house to isolate myself, focus on my work, and maybe reconnect with simpler things. The trip there was peaceful, and when I arrived, I was greeted by a gentle breeze and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees around the property. The house was charming, with a rustic wooden facade, a small porch, and large windows overlooking the dense forest. Inside, everything was cozy. The wooden floor creaked slightly as I walked, and the smell of an old fireplace still lingered in the air. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing my workspace and exploring the surroundings. The absolute silence was exactly what I needed. That night, after a quick meal, I checked the windows before heading to bed. Each one was securely closed, and the locks were in place. Finally, I laid down and let my exhaustion take over. The next morning, however, a small surprise awaited me. The living room window, which I was sure I had locked, was wide open. Strange, I thought, but I didn't pay much attention. Maybe the wind had played a trick, or perhaps I had been more tired than I realized. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. In the following days, I started noticing small anomalies around the house. Things that initially didn't bother me, but when combined, started to unsettle me. First, it was the coffee mug I had left in the kitchen. The next day, it was on the living room table. I wondered if I had gotten distracted and placed it there without realizing. It was a small detail, something that could happen to anyone. Then it was a chair on the porch, which was facing the forest instead of the table, as I had left it. Again, a subtle detail, but something inside me began to stir. That night, I made sure once again that all the windows were locked. I spent some time walking through the house, checking each one. The feeling that something was wrong began to form, but I didn't want to appear paranoid. I decided to ignore it and went to bed. However, when I woke up, the unease returned with force. The kitchen window, which I had carefully locked, was open again. Now, I couldn't pretend it was a coincidence anymore. Something was happening, and I needed to understand what it was. The nights began to drag on, and the sense of discomfort turned into a constant weight. Every creak of the wooden floor or squeak of the windows seemed to amplify the anxiety growing inside me. Even when everything was silent, it was as if there was an invisible presence hovering in the house, something I couldn't see, but could feel. I began compulsively checking the windows and doors before bed. Every lock, every latch, carefully inspected. Yet, the kitchen window continued to be open at dawn. After 3 consecutive nights of displaced objects and mysteriously opened windows, I started questioning my own sanity. Was I so distracted with work that I was forgetting my own actions? Or was something more sinister happening? My sleep, once peaceful, became restless. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, hearing muffled sounds I couldn't identify. I tried to justify the noises as the old house, maybe the wind, but the truth was that fear had taken root deep in my chest. I felt watched, as if at any moment someone might appear. One night, I decided to stay awake. I sat on the living room couch, lights off, watching the darkness in silence, waiting for any sign of movement. Yet, nothing happened. Exhaustion eventually won, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, I found the same scene as always. An open window, a chair out of place. But this time, something inside me snapped. I could no longer ignore it. Something was very wrong, and I needed to find out what it was. That's when I decided it was time to act. Determined to put an end to this oppressive feeling of being watched, I knew I needed proof. The first thing that came to mind was installing security cameras around the house. Fortunately, I had brought my laptop and a few devices that could easily be set up to monitor the rooms. I spent the next day installing the cameras strategically. One in the living room, another in the kitchen, and the last one on the staircase leading to the attic. I wanted to make sure that if anything, or anyone, was really moving my things, I would catch it all. That night, the feeling was different. Although the fear was still present, there was a sliver of hope that, by morning, I would finally have answers. I checked the cameras one last time before going to bed, set my phone alarm to wake up earlier, and tried to relax. I slept more soundly, knowing that the truth would be at my fingertips by dawn. However, What I would find in the recordings was far beyond anything I could have imagined. I woke up before my alarm, gripped by a sense of urgency. Without wasting time, I connected my laptop and opened the program that controlled the cameras. My heart pounded as I fast-forwarded through the previous night's footage. The first few minutes were normal, showing only the empty house, immersed in darkness. I was about to skip ahead faster when something caught my eye. On the camera positioned on the attic staircase, a shadow moved. I held my breath. Slowly, a figure emerged from the attic. The screen showed a person, thin, dressed in dark clothes, with disheveled hair, descending the stairs with calculated, almost silent, movements. It was like watching a nightmare unfold before my eyes. And the worst part was that I had been completely unaware while I slept soundly downstairs. The intruder moved through the house with familiarity, checking the windows and doors as if following a routine. He entered the kitchen, where the camera captured his tall, hunched figure. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as though he was trying not to make a sound. Seeing this filled me with nausea and absolute terror. I was not alone in that house. Someone had been living with me, moving through the shadows while I slept. The person lingered in the kitchen for a few minutes, fiddling with things I couldn't quite make out. Then, with the same eerie calm, he returned to the attic, disappearing into the darkness once again. I sat there, frozen in front of the laptop. My hands trembled. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was echoing through the house. This wasn't just a random intruder. He had been living with me. The fear quickly morphed into an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. And now, what would I do? Still shaken by what I had witnessed, I spent the day in silence, trying to organize my thoughts. I needed to do something, but the fear of confronting that mysterious figure paralyzed me. Every time I looked at the ceiling, knowing he was up there, my mind wavered between panic and fury. But I knew I couldn't let things continue this way. Finally, I decided that facing him was the only way to regain control. I spent the day planning. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, just to feel a bit safer, and waited for the right moment to act. When night fell, instead of going to bed, I prepared for the confrontation. I sat on the couch in the living room, trying to steady my breathing, listening for every small sound in the house. The silence was almost unbearable. My heart was pounding so hard I felt the intruder could hear it. I sat there, motionless, until I heard a faint creak from upstairs. He was moving. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step meticulously calculated to avoid making noise. When I reached the attic entrance, my hand was shaking. The door was slightly ajar, and a dim light seeped through the crack. The knife was firm in my hand, but my entire body trembled with adrenaline. I pushed the door open slowly, and what I saw froze me in place. There was an old mattress thrown in the corner, along with several empty food containers, dirty clothes, and even some of my belongings that I thought I had lost. The intruder wasn't there, but everything indicated that he had been living in the attic for a long time. Shock surged through me like lightning. He knew exactly how and when to move, and now, instead of confronting me, he had fled. Everything was there, proof that he existed, but the threat felt more real than ever. Still in shock from what I had found in the attic, I slowly descended the stairs, trying to process what had just happened. The discovery that someone had been living above me, watching my every move, stripped away any sense of security I once had. My house, my temporary refuge, had been invaded in such a silent, calculated way that I couldn't imagine how long it had been going on. While further investigating the attic, a pile of dirty notes caught my attention. Some papers were scribbled with small drawings and incomprehensible words. However, what terrified me the most was finding a rudimentary map of the house, with entry and exit points marked, as well as a precise schedule of my routines. He knew everything about me. When I went to bed, how long I slept, and even the times when I left the house for a walk. The realization that my life had been studied and monitored so meticulously left me paralyzed. With every second that passed, the terror deepened. He had vanished, but the feeling that he could return at any moment crushed me. I had to get out of there, and fast. The house was no longer a refuge, but a place contaminated by fear and the invisible presence of that invader. Without a second thought, I grabbed the essentials and left the house as quickly as I could. I didn't look back as I drove down the deserted road, the fear still pulsing through every nerve in my body. The house that once symbolized peace and solitude was now a place of horror, marked by the presence of someone who had silently watched me. I was far from being at peace, but at least I was far from that place. However, I knew that the trauma of this experience would stay with me forever. Months later, as I tried to rebuild my life far from that house, I read a news story about a family who had rented a cabin in a remote area. They reported strange noises at night and objects out of place. The details made me freeze. The invader was back, or maybe he had never really left. He had simply found a new home, new faces to watch, and continued moving silently through the darkness, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. While the world kept spinning, he remained in the shadows, relentless. I was exhausted. The city was draining me more each day, and when I saw the ad for that country house, I knew I needed a break. I rented the place for a week, an old wooden house, isolated, surrounded by trees, and with a spacious yard. Exactly what I needed to recharge. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun already beginning to hide on the horizon, and the dirt road leading to the house seemed endless. When I finally parked, the silence around me was almost oppressive. Without the constant sound of cars and horns, the wind in the trees and the distant chirping of birds felt like a welcome relief. The house was charming, with its slightly faded paint and large windows offering a full view of the yard. Inside, it had that smell of old wood, and the floor creaked under my feet. I put my suitcase in the main bedroom and explored the rooms, trying to get familiar with the new environment. I was alone, completely alone, and although I liked it, there was a slight uneasiness in the air, something that bothered me. I shook my head, laughing at myself. I'm just tired, I thought. I just need some rest. I grabbed a book and sat on the porch, trying to lose myself in the pages, but the constant sound of the wind, now seeming to whisper between the trees, made me more aware of my surroundings. It's just a different environment, I kept convincing myself. This was exactly what I needed. Night fell suddenly. Before I realized it, the sky was completely dark, and the house seemed more isolated than before. I went to bed around 11, turning off all the lights in the living room and locking the front door. The silence felt heavy, different from what I was used to, but eventually, I fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, my throat dry. I walked to the kitchen to get some water, and as soon as I passed by the living room, I froze. The lights were on. I'm sure I turned everything off before going to bed, I thought, confused. I went to the switch, feeling the discomfort growing in my chest. I turned the lights off again, but the unease remained. I glanced out the window, but all I saw was the empty yard under the faint moonlight. I went back to bed, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe I just left the lights on without noticing, I kept convincing myself. But even under the covers, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else there with me. The next morning, I woke up with the sunlight flooding the room. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, but when I entered, I felt something cold under my feet. I looked down, and my heart raced. There were wet footprints on the floor, as if someone had walked there during the night. I grabbed a cloth to clean it up, trying to rationalize it. It must have been some leak, or maybe I got the floor wet without realizing it. I did a quick check of the house. The windows were all closed, and the front door was still locked. I knew it didn't make sense. I decided to ignore it, attributing everything to fatigue and the unfamiliar environment. But that nagging feeling, that slight uneasiness, wouldn't leave me. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, but the sight of those footprints kept haunting me. Every time I looked at the floor, I imagined a different explanation. A leak, some animal, maybe even me. But deep down, I knew none of it made sense. The footprints had a clear shape, human, small, but well-defined, and the water had already dried completely on the wooden floor. I decided to take a walk around the yard, maybe to clear my head. The fresh country air always calmed me, and I thought it would help push away the discomfort that had been lingering since the previous night. I walked to the back of the house, where there was a low fence leading to a small forest. The trees there seemed old, with twisted branches swaying slowly in the gentle breeze. I didn't see anything unusual, but the feeling of being watched began to grow in me again. I went back inside, closing all the doors and windows tightly. I locked the front door once more, making sure I was secure. I spent the rest of the day on the couch, with the TV on just to make noise, trying to forget what had happened. The house seemed colder, as if the very environment was changing, becoming hostile in some way. When night fell again, I was exhausted. I lit the fireplace to warm the place and went to take a shower. The hot water was a relief, but with every creak of the walls or sound from outside, my body tensed. I turned off the lights early, hoping a good night's sleep would be enough to push away the paranoia. But that night, something was different. I had barely fallen asleep when a noise from outside the house woke me up. It wasn't the wind, nor the normal creaks of an old house. It was something else closer. I got out of bed silently, my heart pounding. I walked to the bedroom window, my hands trembling slightly, and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. What I saw froze me. In the yard, under the faint light of the moon, there were shadows moving. They weren't just trees swaying in the wind. It was something, or someone, moving slowly, almost stealthily, among the trunks. My breath caught in my throat. As much as I wanted to, I couldn't clearly make out what it was, but the certainty that I was being watched, observed, became almost tangible. I quickly stepped away from the window, locking the bedroom door. What should I do? Going outside wasn't an option. I grabbed the phone, but there was no signal. What was I expecting? I was in the middle of nowhere. I stood still for a few minutes, trying to hear something beyond the sound of my own heartbeat. The silence that followed was even worse than the noise. I went back to bed, with the knife I had grabbed from the kitchen by my side, my ears alert to any sound. The lights in the house remained off, but the fear had already taken root inside me. There was no more denying it. Something was out there, something that didn't belong. And for the first time, I wondered if I was really alone. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every little noise seemed amplified by my tension. The hours dragged on slowly until, at some point during the early morning, I heard a click. My breath stopped. I looked down the hallway through the crack in the bedroom door. The living room lights were on again. This time, I knew I hadn't left any lights on. Panic began to rise, freezing my entire body. I got up slowly, my bare feet cold against the floor. I grabbed the knife and held it tightly, as if it could protect me from whatever was out there, or inside. I opened the bedroom door just enough to take a look down the hallway. Everything was silent, but the lights remained on. I went to the window again, and what I saw this time made my blood run cold. In the yard, standing under the dim porch light, was a figure. At first, it looked like just an elongated shadow, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized it was someone, standing still, staring directly at the house. Fear washed over me completely. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. I stepped away from the window, terror gripping my chest. I went back to the bedroom and locked the door. I tried to think, but my mind was chaos. What do? I tried the phone again, but still no signal. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Footsteps echoed through the house, coming from the hallway. I was cornered. I clutched the knife, trying to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. But the sound grew louder, each step closer. They're inside the house. There was no more time to think. They were here. The sound of footsteps was now right outside the bedroom door. My muscles tensed as I gripped the knife even tighter. Whatever was on the other side was waiting for the right moment to enter, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold onto my composure. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to listen beyond the sound of my own ragged breathing. Silence. The terror intensified. I opened my eyes quickly, trying to decide what to do. Then came the noise. A light tap on the door, almost imperceptible. The kind of tap that seemed to announce that time was running out. Desperation surged through me. I can't stay here. It took all the courage I had to get up and unlock the bedroom door. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, but the lights, still on, gave me a clear view of the path to the living room. The footsteps had stopped, but I knew something was still there, somewhere in the house. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to run. With a final burst of adrenaline, I rushed down the hallway and reached the living room. I locked the door behind me, ignoring the cold that enveloped me. When the sun finally began to rise, silence settled in definitively. I waited, listening, but no sound came. I went to the window, praying to see an empty yard. The shadows had vanished. Nothing moved. The fear still throbbed in the back of my mind, but I knew I had survived the night. I was exhausted and devastated, but alive. As daylight finally filled the house, I knew I had to leave immediately before the darkness brought back whatever the night had hidden. As soon as the sun fully rose, I began packing my things in a rush. I didn't care what I would leave behind. I just needed to get out of that house, out of that place. With each passing minute, my heart still raced at the slightest sound, as if, somehow, they were still watching me, waiting for the next night. I carried my suitcase to the car and looked at the house one last time. In the daylight, the place looked harmless, almost welcoming, but I knew the truth. That house wasn't safe. Nothing there was. I started the car, and as I drove down the dirt road, the fields and trees blurred past me like mere spectators to what I had experienced. The hours of the previous night seemed like a distant nightmare, but the fear remained with me, embedded in my skin. When I finally reached the main road, I started to breathe a little easier, but the weight of the experience didn't disappear. I wondered if I would ever truly feel safe again. I glanced at the rearview mirror, just as a precaution, and a chill ran down my spine. Was there something there? No, there was no one. Even so, the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Did they stay in the house? Or did they follow me? No matter how much I tried to rationalize everything that had happened, none of it made sense. And now, even far from the house, the fear remained. It was as if something was still with me, even after leaving everything behind. Was I finally safe? I couldn't say. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed the stories, leave a comment. Your feedback is really important to us. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.